Melissa here from Imagine, and today I'm going to be sharing with you a fun underwater scene card that I created. These are a number of my Imagine products and Tsukaneko products. I'm starting with a piece of watercolor paper and my fireworks sprays in Bahama Blue, Summer Sky, and Danube Blue. And for this card, I end up not using the Summer Sky. I'm also going to be using the fabulous Shimmering Night Sky emboss from Imagine. I love this embossing powder. It's probably my favorite. I'm going to be using gray flannel memento ink, and the other colors that you see I'm actually not going to use other than Olive Grove to help create my underwater scene. I'm going to be using a 6 round watercolor brush, and then also this cute Picket Fence Studio stamp set that has these adorable little mermaids on it. The first thing I'm doing is taking my watercolor paper and just arranging some of these stamps into a cute little underwater scene. I want the little girl mermaid to be kind of up above the scene, so popped up a little bit. So what I'm actually doing is creating the underwater scene with the embossing powder that I showed you. Now, this is going to allow me to do a few important things. Whenever you watercolor, if you're not great at it, which I have to be honest, I'm a novice at watercoloring. I haven't done a lot of it. But something important to note is that having embossed lines really helps you control your water as you learn, and it keeps everything inside the lines. So first you saw me use the anti-static tool on my watercolor paper, and now I'm using Versamark ink to ink up my stamps and push that down into the watercolor paper. This is Arches watercolor paper. It's a cold press, and it's fairly smooth, but there are ridges in the paper like most watercolor paper has. And so I need to ink up these stamps twice and really stamp them down into the watercolor paper to get a good image. And I do get a good image with the Versamark ink. So once that's finished, I will take that out of my stamping platform and go ahead and put that on a sheet of paper to catch any of the Shimmering Night Sky embossing powder that I'm going to use. So I will open the little pouch that the embossing powder comes in, and I'm pouring almost all the embossing powder out and onto the watercolor paper. And then I'll simply do some tapping. Now, because it has a lot of texture, there are little pieces of embossing powder that got kind of stuck in my background, but I decide I'm going to leave it because it's going to be an underwater scene. It's okay if there are a few sparkly spots there in my underwater scene. Now I'm simply using my heat tool to go ahead and heat up that embossing powder all over so that I can get this beautiful Shimmering Night Sky sparkly blue. I love this, and honestly I was afraid that it wouldn't turn out so good for my sentiment since it was on this paper, but look how gorgeous and clean that embossing powder is. So now I'm going to take the gray flannel gray and watercolor some of these stones. This Arches watercolor paper is super absorbent, so I start off by not having enough water in my memento ink, so I do add more, and then I'm able to get a nice smooth watercolor. And this is not very difficult to do. All I have to do is add a little bit of water to that memento ink. Remember that memento ink is a dye ink, and that means that it will react with water, so you can use it for your alcohol markers, or you can add water to it and actually use it as a watercoloring medium, which is what I'm doing in this video. And so I'm going to speed up the video here because you can see what I'm doing. I do want to add a little bit more of that gray flannel to my Imagine craft mat, and so I just smush that in because I want a little bit of a shadow on the rocks at the bottom and maybe a few speckles as well on those rocks. And you'll see me just add that color. There's enough water there that it reacts and blends really nicely, and I'm going to leave that. So now I'm going to wipe up that gray flannel and then smush down some of the Olive Grove, and I will paint the adorable little plants that come off of those rocks in the Olive Grove. Again, doing the exact same thing, just using water, diluting out the ink just a little bit, and then painting in the branches of this coral or plant that's down in the ocean. You don't need a lot of ink to do this. Actually, I probably put a little bit too much on my craft mat because the memento ink goes a long way, and it's very simple to watercolor with. And again, because I have those embossed lines there, it makes it a little bit easier even to watercolor because I don't have to worry about any of that going outside of the lines here. Now my initial thought was that I was going to use the Memento ink to color the sea that you see as well, but I decided not to do that, and instead I decided to use my fireworks spray to create that background. Now I do notice here that I forgot to paint a little bit of the rock that was peeking out, so I just stamp a little bit more gray flannel to my mat and add that to that rock as well. So now I'm shaking up the Danube blue. Remember that fireworks spray has some great sparkle to it, so I thought this would make a great underwater scene. And the great thing about the Danube blue is that it blends in a little bit with that Shimmering Night Sky, so that the water and my images just kind of blend together, which worked out perfectly. So for the fireworks spray, if you would like to watercolor with it, you just add some water to it, and what you see me doing is adding water to my paintbrush and working that fireworks spray around. I'm going to speed up the video, and I'm not going to show you all of the watercoloring for this as it's quite redundant. However, you can see that what I'm trying to do is keep the edges of that watercolor wet so that I don't get harsh lines as I continue to paint with it. The Danube blue is beautiful, but I don't want my sea to look completely flat. So what I'm going to do as I smush out that color is I decide that I'm going to add some of the Bali blue that I have as well. Not Bali blue, it's called Bahama blue, sorry. I'm going to smash that into the background as well to give a nice variation of color. So I'll spray that onto my mat, and then you can see here as I bring that Bahama blue into the background. What that really does, it adds some depth to the underwater scene, and it also just makes the sparkle kind of pop a little bit more in that fish and the sentiment that I stamped. I like adding that Bahama blue to the sea. If you are going with more of a green sea, you can add different colors of fireworks spray for that too, and I could have added a purple in here. That would have been very pretty, but I love the way that turned out. Now I do notice around my rocks eventually I'm going to have to paint that out because I am going to use the majority of this sheet to actually create my background. Initially I thought I would be cutting a bit of it down, but because I have so many little elements that I'm going to add, I'm going to need that whole sheet. So now I'm taking the mermaid, some snails, and some little hermit crabs and a crab, inking those up with Memento ink and stamping those on some alcohol marker safe paper. In this case, I believe I'm using just a white hammer mill. So I used that Memento Tuxedo Black, my favorite ink for coloring images, and I'm going to stamp those cute little images down and then begin coloring with my alcohol markers. So I happen to use Copics because those are my favorite, and I like to color most of my images with markers or watercolor of some sort, and so that's what you see me doing here. The Memento dye ink is safe no matter what color it is. I just so happen to use Tuxedo Black for my images. Now I'm not going to go into the full coloring for this because I believe that, you know, if you are interested in coloring with markers, you can go elsewhere to find some tutorials on that. I will have all of the coloring on my own YouTube channel that you can access after watching this video, just to see how I color the mermaid and the hermit crabs and all the little images that are going to go into this card. But briefly, I will tell you that typically when I work with Copic markers, I start with my lower valued color first, like E000, and then I go up to my highest color and kind of blend those in. So now that I'm finished, I'm going to fussy cut each one of these little images out with a pair of fine-tipped scissors, and these will all go into my background, or really the foreground of the stamp. As you noticed, I colored this mermaid and all the little accessories in very bright colors, and that's because the background is quite blue and muted with all of that beautiful shimmer and firework spray. So I wanted these images to really pop off my scene. So I am going to take a little bit more of that firework, the Danube blue, and kind of color around those rocks. As I said earlier, I needed more of that in my scene. The nice thing about the firework spray is it's able to blend right in if I add water to it to the rest of the background, and it still looks quite beautiful. So I'm going to make sure that that paper is entirely dry, and then I will be using the die cut to die cut out the edges of that watercolored background. Now I'm going to take a shimmer stick and sparkle, and of course mermaids need to sparkle, so I used that on her tail and her hair, and I'm going to bring that up close to the camera so you can see how beautiful these shimmer sticks are and how much sparkle it adds. It's like the sheer shimmer spray that you can purchase, but it's a lot easier to control. Now I have a piece of watercolored paper that's been watercolored on, and that makes it quite warped. So I'm going to use my tear it tape and add quite a bit of that to this watercolor paper. So now I could run this through a die cut machine to flatten it out, but because there's quite a bit of that embossing on that card, I don't want to do that because I don't want that embossing to stick to the plates that potentially will run through my die cut machine. So instead I just use a lot of adhesive, and really that adhesive holds that paper down and takes out a lot of that warping nicely. So to this panel I only need to add 3 pieces, and then I'll be able to adhere that to my A2 size card, and I have this beautiful watercolored background. Now to the mermaid, I will add some foam dots, and again I'm adding quite a bit because I want her to be stable if I have to send her through the mail, and I will pop her up onto my watercolored background. Then I'm going to take my on point glue, and I will be adding the on point glue to the back of each of the little critters that I cut out for this card. So the crab and the snails and the hermit crabs, I'm going to add just enough so that when I push down on the piece of paper, that glue smushes out and really holds all of the edges down to the card. So this is a beautiful card as is, but I do want to add some pops of white to the background as it's quite blue. So I'm using Irresistible Pico Embellisher, and this happens to be in Wedding Dress. I squeeze a little bit out onto paper towel before I start, and then I go ahead and add little white dots to my bubbles and to my background scene. The reason I like the Pico Embellisher over some other of these type of embellishment type bottles that you can buy is because the Pico is thinner. So you're not going to get like a pointy top on the dot. It's actually going to be a nice round bubble. So what you see me do is squeeze them out in different sizes. I'm adding little eyes to the fish, and then I like to pick up my card and drop it just to make sure that those bubbles form nice and round. And I will tell you that it dries virtually like you see it on the card right now. So I really like the Pico Embellisher for this. And the last thing I'm going to do is just add some on-point glue to the sequence that you see and call this card finished. I believe those nice added touches made it look beautiful in the end. And look at all the sparkle that you see on this card. I love the Mboss Shimmering Night Sky for a card like this. It makes the fish look nice and in the background while the main image pops off the card. I hope you enjoyed today's tutorial, and you'll join us again at Imagine for more fabulous videos. Please make sure to check the description box below for any of the wonderful products that I used in today's tutorial, and join us again at Imagine soon.